The future of cars. Trucks and other vehicles will be separate videos. Some of this will be controversial, perhaps even radical, and you may not agree, but hopefully it'll provide food for thought on the future of cars. I'll first look at whether self-driving could mean in future everyone will use robotaxis and no one will still buy cars. And then what the trends will be, assuming people do keep wanting to own cars. A Trump-led shift back to fossil fuels because everyone's sick of hearing about climate? Or will it be hydrogen, e-fuels, or just ever more EVs and EV hybrids? And lastly, the barriers that could stall an EV transition, leading to a bigger role for EV hybrids. Welcome to a One Finite Planet video on the future of cars. I've had a lot of practice predicting the future in roles as product developer and CEO in technology companies. But practice makes better, not perfect. So I'm very interested in feedback and the thoughts of others. There's a lot to consider in predicting the future because everything's connected. And in a world facing a radical drop in population growth, the rise of robots and AI, economies playing out real-world monopoly while things head towards a few owning everything, although so far something's always resets the game before that end, and my stance of stop with the save the planet because it's a trap doesn't mean I think there's no risk or that we can assume future climate events won't lead to an even greater call to action on emissions in coming years. To save time, I use the word car to include any vehicle primarily designed or used to carry the owner, their friends and family, and the stuff any of those people want to transport. This means I include pickup, ute, bakkie, whatever you want to call them, when I say car, despite some people preferring to call their vehicle the more macho-sounding truck. Also, because if I call those trucks, what do I call commercial vehicles that are purely used to carry commercial loads? Next, the robotaxi thing. And let me say, I'm not convinced by the in the future people won't need to own a car, largely because I see owning a car as a mix of need and want. A lot of people get a lot of joy from car ownership. To me, it's a bit like saying, in the future hotel rooms will become much cheaper so no one will need their own home, and we'll just rent rooms for the time we need them. Cars aren't just transport, they're movable private spaces that are an extension of the concept of a home. Consider, for example, the number of people who've made out, had sex, or even been conceived in a car. It's not just a lot more restrictive in a taxi with a meter running, even without a driver. It's just less personal. Plus, many people own very individual vehicles, like pickups, and the owner often has a lot of personalisation and keeps things permanently in the vehicle. I find it hard to see robotaxis being a full substitute. I suggest the same self-driving technology that enables robotaxis could enable your car to drive itself to you or home after dropping you off, and could reduce the need for taxis. And the rent versus buy equation just may not end up as compelling as some think. More content on this is linked below, and I'd love to hear what others think. As for self-driving tech itself, I think it'll get there, but it's further to go than many assume. Currently, people find many safety systems cut in when not needed. But before cars can drive themselves, all the self-driving tech should be able to be on all the time, demonstrating the tech can always prevent accidents whenever possible and showing it's safe for the car to be in control whilst not doing things that are unexpected. Again, more on that will be linked below. Okay, what about hydrogen cars? Hydrogen for green steel and aluminium, etc.? Yeah. But for fuel, I just don't see it. The whole abundance thing is an attempt to mislead, as ready-to-use hydrogen's far from abundant. You could make the same claim about electrons as they're even more abundant. I cover this in other content linked below. What is realistically promoted with hydrogen vehicles is that you can extract hydrogen from water using clean electrical energy and then supply it to cars that only emit water. Biggest problem I see is that while hydrogen made this way has lower production costs than e-fuels, the cost of compressing, handling and transporting the hydrogen ends up making it more expensive. And both are inherently several times more expensive than directly using the clean electrical energy. Hydrogen gas tanks are at 700 bar, which is 10,000 psi. Your barbecue gas tank is typically at 8 bar or 120 psi. This is almost 100 times the pressure of that gas tank. And not only does that compression require a lot of energy and generate a lot of heat, it makes the tank an explosion risk without even worrying about the Hindenburg similarity. E-fuels? Well, they make a lot more sense than hydrogen. They work with current engine technology and can be distributed through regular gas stations. No new distribution infrastructure, saves at least billions and still zero overall emissions. We could do it now, except it's lower cost to have 2 billion vehicles burning fossil fuels because their emissions are untaxed externals, so the supplier can ignore the cost of removing those emissions back from the atmosphere. At least so far. And there's a lot of money against changing that. So, what about fossil fuel vehicles versus EVs? Could we just drop EVs given the current political environment? Well, no. Beyond uncertainty whether the political environment will change again, there's another reason why the EV revolution will continue regardless of politics, even without emission rules. Cost. EVs inherently cost less and have only been more expensive so far because of Wright's law, see links below, which could be paraphrased as, for a while, producing stuff which is based on a new technology will be crappy and expensive. Consider the first mobile phones, the first computers, first flat-screen TVs. When they first came out, they cost a bomb and were nowhere near as capable of today. And only sold initially because they had some feature enough people were willing to buy despite the extra cost. New technology needs some initial hook, because if the only selling point is it can be cheaper, then that just won't work until you can get at least somewhere near the scale of the previous technology. For EVs, the main cost is the power unit, which for an EV is the battery, not electric motors. To get that, consider if you need to power your house during a blackout, a combustion engine generator can do it, a battery can do it, but an electric motor can't because it doesn't make power and won't help. It must be supplied with power and to turn the power supplied into motion. Power in, power out. So the comparison is between the batteries and the combustion engines. Now consider the data on the history of battery prices. The bottom line is EVs needed incentives and climate-motivated buyers to get past that early crappy and expensive phase, but are now entering the cheaper and more reliable phase, where buyers no longer need to be more environmentally motivated than they do to install home solar. It becomes all about the price, regardless of any climate beliefs. EVs will end up cheaper, so logically, most vehicles should end up being EVs. But that'll only happen provided EVs can meet people's needs. This will be controversial, but I'm going to say we're a long way from EVs meeting everyone's needs. I drive an EV. It costs less to buy and less to run than an equivalent ICE or internal combustion vehicle, and fully meets my needs, but there are some real barriers to making this work for everyone, and you can't buy a price-competitive EV in many situations. The major EV barrier, though, is private charging. The pricing problem, it'll get fixed, but the major EV barrier is private charging. First, consider that charging an EV is basically the same as charging a mobile phone and very different from filling a gas tank. Most of us have locations for private charging of our phones, places where we'll be already spending enough time for our phone to charge and where we can count on a charger being available exclusively for our use. Without private charging, we'd have to use public chargers like those lockers available in some shopping malls. Imagine needing to use them all the time. Well, that's what owning an EV could be like if you must rely only on public chargers. I suggest if you can't count on access to private charging, either at home or a dedicated parking space at work, or something like that, then think carefully before buying an EV. It's not that it can't be done, it's just that in most cases, you have to want that EV. To test it, I've intentionally used only public charging for periods, and I know EV owners who rely on only public charging. But in every case, it requires making adjustments to the person's days, which EV owners can be happy to make, but not everyone would be happy to make. Like, I sit in the car and read emails as I'm going to read them somewhere anyway, or I park at the charger and go for a walk because I go for a walk to exercise every day anyway, or I go for a coffee and chill out. Plus, it's not only finding the time at the right place, because the reality is that sometimes there's no vacancy at that desired right place. Then there's the cost. In Australia, while there's also some free public charges, most aren't free and can cost up to 10 times what people are paying to charge at home. The operating costs of an EV will still result in savings, but those savings can range from almost nothing to zero fuel cost, depending on the charging available. This is discussed further in content on public charging, linked below. The second EV barrier, road trip charging. Even if you can charge at home, this is sort of the equivalent of needing a power bank or public charging for your phone or laptop for those occasions when the power won't last through the day. For those who take the approach with road trips of taking a break every 2 hours as recommended, then when everything comes together, road trip EV charging stops can be even more convenient than with an ICE. You park, plug in, take your break, and when you're ready to go, your vehicle's gained enough charge already, so you just leave. But there's a whole list of things that can block this ideal scenario, ranging from minor through to more major. Your car may be charged before you're ready to go, and it may be necessary to interrupt your stop and move your car. Well, this makes the stop comparable to with an ICE vehicle, at least for stops that would include refuelling. But currently, lower highway range means EVs need refilling during most stops. Interestingly, faster charging could make this worse. Or your car may not have enough charge when you're ready to go. I have a fairly slow charging but quite efficient EV. And the end result is, for me, normally stops are long enough to get the charge I need, and needing to wait longer is rare. I've more often had the previous problem with an alert from my phone charging ended and needing to leave before I would have otherwise. As EV charging speeds increase, needing long stops should happen even less. But I don't look forward to 5 or 10 minute charging because I would not be able to do anything but wait while charging. For some it could be great, but what do you do in 5 or 10 minutes? Plus, you can need to plan your trip around charging locations. Stopping at a lookout, stream or other nature spot and using car power to make your own coffee, it's great. But for current EVs, you can need almost every stop to be at a place where there's charging, which limits your options. A far bigger issue is that all the chargers at the stop can be busy or broken. Waiting for a vacant charger is potentially far worse than waiting while your car charges. While your car charges, you're in control. You can go back to your car when you're ready, but waiting for a charger often means waiting at the charger for a length of time you can't predict, and not being able to go and get food or other things while you wait. Plus, no matter how fast your car charges, you've no control over having to wait while another car charges. This doesn't happen often, but it could add up to an hour to a long trip if it does happen. I recall a long trip at a very busy time of year when I needed to allow for this, but it didn't happen, so I arrived an hour earlier than I needed to. The biggest hassle is that it could happen. Lastly, there are people who don't want to stop and take breaks. Of course, almost no one would stop for a break during an urban fuel stop, but there are people, or trips for some people, when taking a break, even when on a road trip while at a charger, would be considered just time wasted. Only solution here is for longer range EVs, as most people will stop at least once a day while driving, and every year on average, the range typical for new EVs increases. So what's the solution for these barriers and other limitations? Range extended EV hybrids, a solution for EV limitations. There are vehicles described as EREVs, extended range electric vehicles, and, confusingly, some described as PHEVs or phews, but not all, that are effectively EV hybrids, as they were designed and operate like an EV that's been equipped with an onboard gasoline-powered generator for when plugging into charge is impractical. You can do it on the road. Others, which I call ICE PHEVs, are based on an ICE vehicle with an added EV system with limited range and limited power. It's been added to improve rated fuel economy, even if it's not always practical in real use. The key point of difference is EV phev electric motors can provide full or almost full power, allowing the vehicles to be driven as an EV in almost any situation, and can be less expensive as they don't need a regular gearbox. ICE-based PHEVs like the Ford Ranger PHEV, or historically most European PHEVs, have not only very limited EV-only range, but also very limited EV-only power, and usually come at a price increase over a non-PHEV version of that same car. Compare the expensive ICE-based Ford Ranger PHEV with 75 kilowatts of electric power with a lower cost and usually better equipped BYD Shark PHEV with 320 kilowatts of electric power. This at least near full power from electric motors results in vehicles that have not just a hybridised drivetrain, but genuinely a hybrid of both EV and a hybrid vehicle. They can produce ICE hybrid economy when fuelled on gasoline, and EV-only operation when charging's available. As further discussed in content on EV hybrids linked below, there have long been both EV PHEVs, like the Chevrolet Volt and BYD PHEVs, and ICE-based PHEVs like Volvo's and most European PHEVs. Arguably, the EV hybrids can be the best of both worlds, while some ICE PHEVs are compromised as an EV and often even compromised compared to non-plug-in hybrids when not used as an EV. Note, I specifically mentioned BYD EV PHEVs because for some time they dominated the cost-effective EV PHEV market. But now BYD is beginning to face impressive competition with competitor EV hybrids having EV-only range exceeding 400 kilometres as shown here. The limiting factor for early EV hybrids like Volt was that Wright's Law problem, where new technologies, even when they should cost less, are initially expensive until design and production evolve. Although BYD began producing EV hybrids way back in 2008, it was only in 2022 when the EV hybrids finally cost less than a regular ICE vehicle that BYD stopped production of regular ICE vehicles altogether. So, to sum up, I don't see hydrogen for vehicles as having a future. But I see efuels as a way to indefinitely allow continued use of combustion engine vehicles. Still expect the combustion engine will progressively be increasingly only ever used as part of an EV hybrid drivetrain, and only offered when there are reasons that justify the increased cost of both production and operation over and above an EV. For a long time, cases where the cost is justified may include long-distance heavy towing, military scenarios, or any other place where there's no grid but a large store of power might be required. Wright's Law should result in more improvements in EVs and EV hybrids than in more mature combustion technology. And I feel we're now at a point where both EVs and EV hybrids are already beginning to provide more vehicle for the same price than conventional ICE vehicles. While many pure EV enthusiasts would prefer it's EVs alone that'll take over, I feel there are still barriers to overcome before that can happen. Expect increasing cost of fuel to mean even vehicles with combustion engines use those engines less and less. But if we could also move to e-fuels there's no reason to ever end the use of combustion for those prepared to pay for the fuel. Anyway, what do you think? Leave comments below.